So I'm gonna turn it over to you and say, hey, Sean, what's the deal with consolidation? Oh my God, no, that's not even.
What do you mean? Oh my God.
Well, in all seriousness, pretending that I'm new to this planet, and why is consolidation such a big deal for shops? Why are so many shops focused on it?
Right.
And that's a real question, huh?
Right. So, it depends on your point of view.
Yeah.
Right. We'll take this from management and then from the DBA.
Mm-hmm.
So for management, they're sitting there looking at those licensing costs.
Yeah.
And they're looking at the cost of whatever servers they're putting it on, right? Whether it's cloud or not.
Right.
And they're going, oh my God. And if they're in a colo, then it's like, oh my God, cooling. I keep wanting to say heating and cooling.
I know.
But oh my God, cooling and personnel and physical security and all of this is like, it's this whole infrastructure, right?
Oh, so it's expensive. Oh.
And so they're just going, oh my God, we've got to find a way to get this under control. This is ridiculous.
Sure. And those things, it does tend to spread when you have an environment. You're like, oh, we'll just do another SQL Server and another and another.
Yeah. And so it really does get out of hand.
Yeah.
Right. And I can see how it does, because it's not just, oh, well, we'll just do another and another and another. Right. A lot of times it's, well, we don't want this affecting other applications, or we don't want other applications affecting ours.
Mm-hmm.
And, so we've got these requirements that it's just, so it's not that they just think, oh, hey, let's just do this. That's what they do with clusters.
True.
But
clusters everywhere.
Yes.
Good for you.
And why clusters everywhere? Because it sounds cool.
It does sound very
the
cool.
Word cluster. Oh my God, we got a cluster.
Ooh. It's easier to say than availability group too. You'd think with
say AG.
Yeah, but
that's easier
for somebody who's not, in the know.
Or
AAG.
Or what is the new thing? AAG, that the people that like want to always on.
That would be AOAG, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know that anyone says that.
But I do know that they say AAG.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Anyway, we try to discourage that as much as possible. So, okay, so from the manager's point of view, purely cost.
Cool. All right.
From the DBA's point of view, we have mixed emotions.
We do have mixed emotions about this.
Because yes, consolidating will allow us to manage fewer servers, not less servers, fewer servers, and therefore reduce our efforts.
Yeah. But
at the same time, having more servers is cooler and makes us look better and ensures our jobs, because we just, who wants to be a DBA of a 5-server shop, right? I mean,
no offense, small shop DBAs.
It happens, right? But I'm just saying,
it's way
nobody wants to go from 100 to 5.
Yeah, it's way cooler to say I manage 800 instances.
That's right.
Yeah, but
each one of them 1 gig.
Oh wow.
So
okay, so that's the why.
Yeah, that's the why.
Okay. So it's a totally complex process with boots on the ground. There's technical aspects out the wazoo, right? That's the hard part.
So
it's a leading question.
Yeah, I know, right? So it's both easier and harder than we make it.
It is indeed.
Right? It's like healthcare, right? Everybody says, who knew healthcare was so complicated? It's really not. We make it complicated.
Yeah.
You could just say, cast his broken leg, but no, right? Because healthcare itself, right? Field medicine, right? You don't see somebody going up, medic up on the front lines, and he comes up and says, okay, give me your insurance card.
I think actually that's a better analogy. Yeah.
The act of healthcare itself
is straightforward.
It's straightforward. Yes.
Can be straightforward.
So cool. I would say the hardest part about consolidation is going to be tiering your applications.
That's the hardest part.
I think so, because there's politics involved.
Yeah.
Everything else is numbers.
In the ideal scenario, like, you're the only person in a company and you have 100 servers and you're going to consolidate them. That would be a really easy scenario, wouldn't it? Because you know all of your apps, you're in charge of everything. You don't have to ask permission for anyone.
Like if I'm a one-person company?
You're a one-person company.
Yes,
and you
that
got
would be
100
very
instances.
easy. Yes, I probably wouldn't have gotten 100 sprawl to begin with.
Maybe you
I'm the only
inherited
one
it
there.
from someone. Maybe
Fair enough.
you inherited it from me, and I'm just like instance happy.
Okay.
And I
fair enough.
Go away and get hit by a bus driven by monkeys and
Fair enough.
with lottery tickets.
So the scenario there being is like you've got this, you've got these groups that manage their apps, and nobody wants to say, "Oh, well, my app is nothing."
Yeah.
Right. You got to justify it. It's sure, right? Oh, you can't do without this app that tells you what's going to be for lunch downstairs.
That's right. It also does the Christmas planning.
That's right.
And
right?
so, company's going to fold without that sucker.
So, everybody wants to be super important. And, if they've got a VP backing them up, it's even better.
Sure.
Right.
Because
worse, better.
Again, everyone wants to be, because it's important to us. We want to feel important. We want to look important. So yeah, my database, super important, but maybe not.
So from an objective standpoint,
yeah,
you've got to find a way to get somebody to help you tier these applications.
Now, in case someone is looking at you funny and going, tiering? What do you mean by tiering?
Well, it's how many servers, it's how many people your servers have killed. They've got little tiers.
Oh, yeah, no, that's a gangster thing or something.
Yeah, something like that.
No, no. Tiering is basically measuring the importance of, and we put them in, top, middle, bottom, gold, silver, bronze, however you do that.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, tier 1, 2, 3, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, the tier 1 are the most important ones, and so on, right? And so getting those tiered properly is really important. And I think that is the hardest thing.
Okay.
There are some hard aspects of the other ones too, but the other ones you can at least back up with numbers.
Okay. I could see that. So, you go through your process, you tier the apps, presumably that's going to mean talking to a lot of people and sussing things out and having meetings, which, yay, that's why we all got into IT. Why is that the first step? Why is that so important?
Well, because it sets you up for the next step. I think I got
yeah.
So you've got to decide which apps to put on which servers.
Right.
And you can't do that unless you have them all tiered out, because so there are different consolidation models, right? I'm going to call it the tiered model and the mixed model.
Which might be what I call it. No, I call it homogeneous and I call it mixed. But
right. So we'll call it the tiered model and the mixed model,
okay.
right? They both have their advantages, but so the tiered model is, okay, I've got these tier 1 apps and I'm going to put their databases on a server, right? Doesn't matter how many, it could be 50, it could be 2, right? So the advantage to that is, hey, you know how important that box is.
Right, because everything on here is top tier.
Everything on here is top tier, right? The bad part about that is everything on here is top tier.
Okay, why is that bad? Because you're able to give gold level service to this one box.
Sure.
So what's bad about it?
If something goes wrong, if something happens with the hardware, all your top tier applications are down.
No. Or at least a bunch of them, because
if
you're a big shop, then you're going to have a bunch of top tier servers.
Right.
But yeah.
There's also that really big disadvantage. I don't know if we'll talk about it later or not, but I'll talk about it here. There's also that really big disadvantage that when it comes time, because actually it was Rick in chat that made me think of this again.
Oh, nice.
That when it comes time for patching, now I've got to coordinate a major downtime with all of my top tier clients. Dude, I have done that before. And it's always, well, we can't do that because this is our monthly processing thing, or we can't do that because our reports run then, or we can't do that because this is when Asia comes online, or we can't do that because of this. And so you can't coordinate all of those guys a lot of times at once, even on the weekends.
I'm actually kind of getting a vision of the databases themselves as various teams going, ooh, yeah, no, that's not a good time for me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really tough to coordinate that many top level apps.
Yeah.
Right. For any downtime at all. I mean, forget patching, anything at all goes wrong, right? You need to burp SQL for something. And it's hard. So for that reason, I tend to go more towards the mixed model, right? Where you have one or two top tier apps on there, maybe, and then maybe some silvers and some bronze in there, right? Because you still have to coordinate with them. But you're a silver.
It's a lot. Yeah, I was gonna say it's a lot easier to say you're a bronze. Quiet.
Right. Right.
You don't have an uptime requirement of 4 nines or whatever.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to tell Arya Stark to shut up than it is to tell Tyrion Lannister to shut up.
Arya Stark before she gets the sword, but anyway.
Yeah, but all the same, right? Yeah. So
she's little.
So yeah, and of course, the highest tiered application on your server is what sets the tier level for the server, right?
Sure.
So if I've got 40 bronze databases on a server and 1 gold, the whole server is gold now. So somebody benefits from that.
Yeah.
Right.
Probably those bronze databases.
Probably those bronze ones, right? Well, hopefully the gold does too.
Well, yeah.
And of course there are resources that get involved in that too. There are it's not just tiers, right? This is just our first level, right? So what we're doing now is, okay, so we've tiered off our apps, and now we've picked a model that we want to go by.
Okay.
Right. I'm not going to tell you can't go with the tiered model on a server.
Right.
I'm just telling you that politically speaking, it's fraught.
Fraud's such a good word.
Yes.
Okay, so I had a question and I instantly forgot it. So we've got our 2 different models. That was the question. So in a given shop, let's say you're in a huge shop, you've got 800 instances or whatever.
Sure.
You're not necessarily going to say don't do that, because I'm gonna.
Okay.
Trust me. You're not necessarily going to say, okay, I have chosen the tiered model, the homogeneous model, as I call it in the article, for my entire shop. I mean, you're probably going to have some tiered databases, some mixed databases, some tiered instances, and some mixed.
Sure, absolutely.
So it's per, okay, now we're going to start this
it'll be per server, right? It's a model you try to follow throughout.
Yeah.
But it's not a given, right? I mean, you don't have to say, no, we can't do this because we've chosen this model. Come on, man.
I'll be right back. You guys go ahead. What comes next?
Okay, now you've got to decide which servers or which apps can play well together. A good place to start with playing well together is the nature of the apps and the nature of their business cycle, right? It would be absolutely perfect if you could hotel these things. We call it hoteling when you have when you share cubes, right? Day shift and night shift.
Oh, I see.
Right. So if one guy's app is only only active in the US and somebody else is only active in Europe or Asia or Australia or something, right? You might have a pretty good fit there. Right, you just hand off those resources to that other database, and now you're golden, right?
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to tell you that almost never works out that way.
No, for some strange reason.
So, yeah,
it's okay. Ignore me. Okay, please continue.
So, it would be nice if you could figure something like that out. But if you can't, okay, whatever, right? And even if you can, you're not guaranteed that app isn't going to expand.
Yeah.
Right. So
because things do not stay the same for some strange reason.
Yeah. So, okay. And then of course you've got that, the extra resources that you need to run that other application offline. Right. Which what I mean by that is when Asia is online, the US is doing maintenance and vice versa. Right. So you're still going to have a period there where you've got a lot of resources being taken up by the offline databases. Sure. Or by the offline app. Right? Sure. Off duty is better. Off duty is better. Right. Necessarily offline. So let's see. Next. So you may have gotten those guys worked out. Okay, these guys can play together socially, right? Now you've got to figure out from a resource perspective, and that's the one where you're probably going to spend the next major amount of time.
Okay.
Because
is this officially step 4 on here?
I don't know. Yeah, this is data requirements. So sure.
Okay, cool.
So, how much overall, and this is the one that you need actually quite a bit of history for, right? You need some baseline, some benchmarks for this.
Right. And I remember asking you specifically if you have an automated way to do this, because in a really big shop, even a single DBA team in charge of all of these is not going to intimately know all of the applications.
Well, oh God, no.
Yeah, no. And the resources and so forth.
Yeah, the more servers you have, the less you're going to know about them, right?
Sure.
It just becomes bits and bytes and all that stuff after that. You're just like, whatever. But yeah, you need to know not only how much disk space these guys take up, but what their growth is like.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you can't just put in what you have now and then expect these guys to play nicely. And so you need to go to these guys and say, do y'all have any big monthly or yearly bulk inserts I should know about?
Yeah.
Or, do you have anything that blows your database out periodically for some reason that could choke out these other ones on the disk, right? So how much free space do you leave on the disk, right? I ordinarily say leave about 20% free on the disk if you can.
Right.
The more databases you get on there like that, the more I say leave more data space, because
that's like fill factor, but for database files.
God, yes. So
excuse me 1 second. The guinea pig is going crazy. If that's distracting you, I will take it out of the room. Okay, carry on then.
So, I deal better with questions than with brain dumps.
Oh,
so I'm getting kind of
give me this then. So let's see. We've talked about tiering the applications, the consolidation model, the security requirements. We have not yet
talked about that.
So
you're right.
What kind of security requirements could possibly be involved in a consolidation?
Right. So there's a difference between consolidating servers and consolidating instances.
Yeah.
Right now we're at the consolidating servers part. Right. So I'm just trying to decide physically whether or not these applications can be housed on the same server.
Yeah.
From a resource perspective of disk.
Okay.
Right. You'll do the same analysis for
CPU and
memory and stuff, right? But I think that security is probably going to be the biggest driver of instance consolidation, right? There's a secondary one of performance of resources, but we'll talk about that in a second. Don't let me forget.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are quite a few applications that require tighter security. Sometimes that means we need it in our own database so that people can't, so that only our people have access to the data. Sometimes it means it has to be on its own server because we don't want any chance at all of anybody being able to get in there that shouldn't be in there. And we can talk about how that happens too, right?
Yeah, that's a big thing.
But now you've got to decide, does a different server mean a different instance or a different physical server? Because as far as SQL is concerned, there's no difference, right? A separate instance of SQL doesn't know about the other instances on the box, right? They have no idea they're even there. It's not like they crosstalk or anything, right?
Yeah.
So as far as SQL is concerned, it is a completely separate server. And if you don't give other users access to that other instance, you're segregated.
Right.
But then again, you can't necessarily count on if that application has like external files or something that it stores on the drive. You can't count on the admins assigning permissions appropriately so that only people that have access to this instance have access to these files. So like if you're
so to summarize very briefly, so like it helps to have separate instances, but it's not like it's a guarantee.
Right.
Any plan, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and the enemy is us.
Yeah. If there are if there are sensitive external dependencies, right? And the files is a perfect example, right? So, you're saving PDFs of orders on the hard drive.
Yeah.
Or you're bringing in customer orders via XML that are then going to be shredded and put into the database and then kept in their XML format. Or contracts that get saved in Word format and then linked to in the database, stuff like that, right? So, things like that. You've got to make sure that only this instance can access, only users from this instance can access that data, right? So that's at the OS level, and you can't guarantee that somebody's going to do that right. So, that's something that would actually put you on a separate server.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the smart guys will put all that stuff on a separate disk.
Okay.
And only those people get that disk, right? They do it in a group, and boom, and that's it, right? But so you don't want to mess around with like folder security or anything. This disk doesn't even exist to you. Just so yeah, exactly. So security is a big driver for that, right? The second big driver is, like I said, resources.
Right.
And we're talking about separate instances now, right? The problem with an instance of SQL and having multiple databases on there is that you can't assign resources per database, right?
Right.
So you can't say, I want this database to use 20 gigs or something like that, right? Or, so you still have a runaway query that can just and blow everybody out of the water, right? It blows up your cache and it just kills everything. So putting it on a separate instance, you can give them both the amount of memory that they need, and they both play in their own little spaces.
Sure, because you can do it by instance, not by database. Absolutely.
Right. And so therefore you can reserve some instances, right? And I just started talking about CPU affinity. So you can, with separate instances, right? You can set the affinity so that each instance gets its own set of CPUs. Now, this is for a box with a lot of CPUs, right?
Right.
But at least you can do that. Now, I did a video a couple of weeks ago, and it's up on the site right now about CPU affinity.
Would that be on youtube.com/midnightdba?
And midnightdba.com.
What? That's crazy talk.
And I talk about the use. One of the big things I talk about is the important use of trace flag 8002 when you set CPU affinity.
Okay.
I will leave it to you to go watch the video.
Oh, you have homework now.
Ooh, no, not homework, just external resources.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
See also.
Yes. I wanted you to talk about data requirements because it was space and data retention, data archival, how large the data files, and
right. So
you're moving resources too.
Right. So this goes along the same lines of what we've talked about quite a bit in the past with, how much disk space do you need and how many resources do you need, right? You're going to have this requirement in a lot of databases to archive the data or to delete the data off. And you've got to make sure that you have all of the resources for that, possibly for multiple databases having to do this at once. Because regardless of what you may like to do, you cannot guarantee that all of your archive operations are going to be able to be scheduled at different times completely. The more databases you get on that server, right, the bigger problem you're going to have with that. So you're not going to be able to make sure that everything happens at night or everything happens between this time and this time. Because even if you do, and this is where that performance can really take a hit, this guy has to go between midnight and 1. This guy has to go between, 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and so on, right? But then they have to back up and reindex and check DB and something at some time.
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to have these guys over here doing their archiving, which could be, hundreds of millions of rows. And these guys over here doing their they're highly tuned backups because they're using Minion backup and they can do that very easily. And you've got these other guys running CheckDBs and so on. So, you've got, and that gets into what I like to call the moving resources, right? Where, and this is something that a lot of people don't take into account when they size a box.
Sure.
Which is something you're going to be doing when you consolidate, right? You're going to be sizing a box for all of these guys.
Because it seems like it would be nice and simple. I've got 10 databases, each of which take up 100 gigs, and I need whatever that adds up to. Right. I'm not going to math on air.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, when I do it, I always go 1 gig, and then he's okay. So I need 1 gig of this and 1 gig. So, that moving space or moving resources is your maintenance.
Okay.
Right? Because we've all overtuned a database or overtuned a backup, right? I have.
I was going to say, I'm not sure all of us have overtuned it, but
I have.
Briefly, for the people who are not in the know, you can tune backups. You can arrange it so that it will go faster, and therefore you'll have faster restores too. But it also means dedicating extra resources to that backup, extra memory and so forth.
Yeah. Memory, CPU, right?
Yeah.
Disk. So I was at this one shop where I tuned the backups. I was trying to show off how fast I could get their backups. And I succeeded big time.
Okay.
But nobody could get into the website.
Oh, wow.
At all.
So like you just basically sucked all of the resources up for the backup, which is cool.
Right.
But they don't like that all the time.
And to which, when they told me that, I said, so it's only 15 minutes. Okay, so I didn't get away with that fully, right? But that's that moving space I'm talking about. When you run your maintenance, you need to not only have enough time, or you need to not only have enough resources to run your normal activities, but you need to be able to have those resources, those extra resources available to run your normal activities and run your maintenance at the same time, because the more and more we go, the more people don't have downtimes.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I call those moving resources that just they go and they go away. You can call them dynamic if you want to, but yeah, they're just those. So when you spec your servers, you've got to take into account that if you put 600 databases on one server, that these guys are all going to have to be backed up, and they're all going to have to be CheckDB and re-indexed.
And one of the things about CheckDB is it does that background snapshot that's got to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And you can also do, in certain circumstances, custom snapshots, and so you want to make room for that somewhere else. And so
if you're an enterprise.
Yeah. So yeah, there's more than just I have 10 databases that take up 500 gigs of space. Now, you were talking about moving resources. Did you also talk about sorry, I zoned out for a second because I was typing. Databases that grow and shrink a lot due to like archival requirements, things like that?
No, we haven't talked about that yet.
Now we have.
So yeah, another thing to consider is, do you have those databases that just get ridiculously big and then shrink back down, right? So, and that doesn't have to be through any kind of ridiculous bulk insert process or something, because you could say, oh, well, I don't have this ridiculous bulk insert thing, right?
Sure.
But it could be through normal data usage, and then every 2 or 3 months they run their delete routine to shrink everything back down, right? So, or it could even be through rogue log mishaps with backups and whatnot, right? The log just goes really big for some reason, like replication breaks for 2 days, or CDC stops working, or the AG stops synchronizing, or it starts synchronizing really slowly, right? And
check your sys database files for log reuse weight description to see if it's an AG issue, or if you're not backing up your log files, or it's important.
If you're on Minion Backup, you already have that data.
What? That is crazy talk. Minion Backup? What's that?
Don't get me started.
It's our free backup tool. Go look at minionware.net. Go get it. Go.
So anyway, you just have to make sure that you've got this type of stuff worked out, right? And something that a lot of people don't consider is disk fragmentation.
Okay.
So I'll tell the story very briefly.
Speaking of story, we're going to take a break in a second and talk about good and bad stories.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I had this one server where they couldn't, their reindex was running for over a day, and then finally just failing.
Man.
Right. And I looked at it and I noticed that their disk, and they had dozens of databases on the same disk, right? That their disk was 90-something% fragmented.
Oh, well, the disk itself was fragmented.
Yeah. At the OS level. So we took a downtime, defragged the disk, and their reindex finished in a couple hours after that. So it still matters, right? Even on SSDs, it's not as important, but sequential reads are still better than random reads, right? And the way it goes, and this is why I'm always so big on your growth rates.
Right.
Because if you've got one database that's growing its files at 1 gig, another one that's growing them at 10 megs, another one's growing at 10 gigs, another one's growing at 5%. So if it's all over the board, then these guys are going to be growing over each other on the disk, and your disk is going to get highly fragmented.
Yeah.
But if you have them all set for 500 megs or 1 gig or the same amount, right? That's not a percent.
Not a percent. Don't do file growth rates as percentages. It's bad.
Then they're all going to grow over each other, but they're going to do it in very predictable chunks, and your data and your disk itself is going to fragment at a lot lower rate, and it's not going to get as fragmented.
Yeah.
So yeah, it still matters.
So I think we've got about 20 minutes left. So what I want to do is first talk about multi-tenant versus single-tenant.
Okay.
And again, assuming that not everybody in chat is necessarily familiar with those terms. A single-tenant database is one where you have one database per customer or per, well, not user in the sense of an individual person.
All the users are in the same database, right? All the customers share the same database.
That's a multi-tenant.
Yes.
Because there's one database and multiple tenants within one database.
I zoned out too. So
yeah, it's okay. We do this. It's fine. And then single tenant databases means you've got an application, the company does business, they add on more customers. Each one of those customers gets its own individual database. You're always adding more databases. So that's something to bear in mind for a couple of reasons.
So I got an email just yesterday. And now we were talking about this.
Yes.
How common is it still to have single tenant databases, right?
I haven't run into it a lot.
So I got an email just yesterday for help with a server that was having performance problems. And when I got logged in there, because it was in Azure, they had 600 single tenant databases on there. So it's still there.
Okay.
I mean, it's coincidence that it just happened yesterday, but it really did. So
I believe you.
Yeah. And again, with single tenant databases, you are going to be adding more and more and more databases. Hopefully you're that successful, right? That's the problem to have.
Right.
And they're all going to be different sizes. And again, you've got that growing over each other problem, right?
But there's also something else. And by the way, this is it's not bonus content exactly, but it's not published yet. So it's a good thing you're here for this. The rest of the blog, the second half will come out next week. You were talking about stupid code doing stupid things. And here's where it's story time. I had asked you in the interview for a good consolidation experience and a bad one.
Okay. What's the bad one I gave?
The bad one you gave was a single tenant. There we go. Just had to get him started.
Is it the one I'm thinking? Yeah.
Probably.
So the application itself, and you still actually see this from time to time.
Right.
The application itself, when it connected to the database, if it found any other databases on there, any other user databases on there, it shut down. It just disconnected.
That was one. The other one you were talking about was stupid code doing stupid things. And I was surprised about this because this is all in the context of consolidation, right? Obviously, that there was an application, and I don't know whether it came from the vendor or if it was in-house, but it was something that was run. I don't know if it was every day or on a trigger or whatever, but a stored procedure that ran to deal with the permissions for the single tenant databases.
Oh, yes, that one.
Yeah.
You see, I have more than one.
Oh, yes.
I have more than these two.
This is why we get him talking. It's fun.
So, yeah, this this SP checked to make sure that it made sure that all of the databases had the same security, something like that.
I think the way you remembered it before was that it was either a login or a set of logins had to have DB owner on all the databases,
right?
Which is fine if the assumption holds true that only that application with those single tenant databases is on the instance. It's not okay if you've consolidated and there's any other applications database on that instance. Because now these random people have database owner on something that's completely unrelated to them.
It's always been so incredibly surprising to me.
That way lies madness.
The assumptions that devs make.
I'm going to be fair and say the assumptions humans make. We get to be snide about devs, but it's not just devs.
Yeah, sure. But I'm just saying,
but go ahead and
now
be
it's devs. Yeah, the assumptions they make are just astounding to me sometimes. That's right up there with, in the early knots and beforehand, that it was very common to have apps that insisted on running under not sysadmin, but the SA account.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
we had that fight lots of times.
Really?
Not between us, but with other people.
So yeah, that's something that will thwart your security efforts on a consolidation project if you've got code that does something stupid like that.
Right. We also had a question, by the way, I'm going to interrupt myself, about if it would be a good idea to separate instances via GDPR or other privacy regulations. And so that's what I want to talk about right now. That's what I want you to talk about right now.
Right. It depends. So GDPR is really more about data privacy and how much data you're keeping for how long, and making sure that the data is deleted when they want it to be.
Which would include backups and archival.
But
it's not about that.
That's harder than it sounds, right?
It is harder. That's why I brought it up. Anyway.
But that's outside of the scope of this discussion, right?
It really does depend.
It really does depend. But, I would say not outside of the normal security considerations we've already talked about.
Okay.
So, those considerations being, can you effectively manage who has access to the data and the databases, right? If you can, then GDPR is satisfied. If you've got the Wild West in your shop, then you're still going to have those problems, right? You're just moving it across boxes instead of keeping it on one box, but at least it won't be as ingrained, I hope, as pervasive, right? Because if you've got this Wild West, then they can easily go, whoever's putting all of these, giving users this access to these databases they shouldn't have, can do the same thing on a different server. They can say, oh, well, I'm just going to give this guy access here, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on why you're having this problem. But, I would say that's part of the normal consideration of security. I don't think GDPR in this case is as big of a factor.
Mm.
So,
okay.
So as far as getting picky about resources, yeah. Let's put it this way. I'm going to say you're not going to, but what I mean to say is you shouldn't have multiple instances on a server by accident.
No, yeah, gosh.
That's the kind of thing that you should plan for.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up to fail big time.
Sure.
So all of these things in a consolidation effort. Now, a consolidation is, to me, for the DBA, a consolidation is everything that an audit is, right? We used to want to, when I remember because I was a DBA pre-audits, right? And we loved it when companies started being forced to audit, because that gave us everything we wanted. We wanted to lock devs out of prod. We wanted to lock the QA out of prod. We wanted to get all these tools out of prod that didn't have any business being in there.
I mean, Dragon Darlings.
Right. And we could never justify it because, well, I've had it for the last 6 years and blah, 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 right? But now it's coming from the CEO because we're under audit.
Yeah.
Right. And so now we were like, hey, dude, I'm just doing what I'm told, right?
I was just yesterday going over that article again that we wrote about why security lockdowns fail and what you have to do in order to fix them. But that's outside of the scope.
Right.
I wanted to finish up. I just wanted to do a couple more things, but go ahead.
Okay. So this being like audits, right? So this is when you go through a consolidation as a DBA, this is the deepest you will ever get a chance to look into your environment.
Yeah, that's true.
So
generally speaking, you're not allowed the time. And now it's like an imperative, like, no, we've got to do this now. Oh, good.
Right. So, now is the time. Now is when you take the time to dig into all the resources that your instances use and which databases are used the most, which databases aren't needed at all anymore.
Right.
Right.
Which takes all of that just takes so much sleuthing, because frequently in shops you don't even know who's supposed to be in charge of a database.
Yeah, a lot of times nobody they don't. Yeah.
So
when you're talking resources, these monster servers that you're going to put up for your consolidation, these are not an accident, right? You're going to purposefully scope these big boxes to be able to house all of this, and it's a grand thing. I mean, it's beautiful to be able to put your environment under a microscope like that and have it sanctioned.
Yeah.
So that now's the time to put things in order, right? And this is another thing I really love about consolidation is I've often used consolidation as a time to true up the enterprise, right?
Yeah.
So all the devs and the QA and the testers and all these guys, all these
people,
end users, have access to your servers, to your prod servers, right? But you know what? Not on the new server.
That's right.
That was that server. You can still have access to that server. Go for it.
There's nothing on it.
But on this server, we're going to have this setup, right? On this server, we're going to have this layout for the databases on disk. For this server, we're going to have this layout, and we're finally going to be able to switch to Minion for our maintenance,
right?
And get off of that other routine.
Yes, that one.
So it's a time to start anew, right? We're going to get procedures. We're going to get things. We're going to keep this box as pristine as possible for as long as we can.
I think you're the only person I know that gets so excited and upbeat about consolidation. But I love it. I love the idea. It's the life-changing magic of tidying up your SQL enterprise.
Because it's a chance.
Yeah.
It's a chance to shed your tech debt that you've been carrying around on the servers of things being patched together and things being done different ways. It's time to not only consolidate your servers and your resources, but also your naming conventions, your processes, your data structure. And I mean, I've got a lot to say about why it matters, why the data structure matters, right?
But that's another talk.
But yeah, so it's a time it's Christmas for a DBA, right? You get to set things right. You get to write you pull out your personal injury list and
all right. So he's very excited about this. I'm going to rein it in a little bit. All right. Now here's a question that you might be a little, not less enthusiastic about, but this took an interesting turn when I asked the question. So talk to me a little bit about consolidating to the cloud. And that's the way I asked it too. So talk to me about consolidating to the cloud.
Right. So there's no such thing.
What? What do you mean? Of course I can consolidate to the cloud.
Of course you can. But understand that the cloud is a data center.
Yeah.
Right?
The cloud is just someone else's computer.
Yeah. We have our stuff in data centers. I mean, when we say on-prem, very rarely anymore is it actually on-prem.
Yeah, and
right?
kind of thank God, because the days of having a production server under someone's desk, that was not a fun time.
Not just that, but like this place you consulted at for the last few years, right?
Yeah.
Their servers were on-prem.
They had a data center.
Yeah, but they had servers
on-prem too. Yeah, that's right.
So, I don't miss spending time in server rooms.
Sure.
Right?
They're
so
loud.
If you look at the cloud just as another colo,
sure,
right, which it is,
sure,
then you're either in this colo or in this colo or in this colo or in this colo. It doesn't matter which colo you're in, right? Whether it's called Azure or it's called Google or it's called AWS. It doesn't matter what the name of it is. You've either got 100 servers or 1,000 servers, or you're consolidated into 10.
So the question then is not, what about consolidating to the cloud? It's, we're going to consolidate. And separately, we're also going to make a decision about whether we're going to host in our own data center or colo or in the cloud. So it's, you called it housing.
Yeah.
There's a consolidation and then there's housing. And it's kind of two separate things, really.
I think so.
I think that's an interesting viewpoint, and I think it's clarifying.
Yeah, one of the things when and I've got plenty of SQL students right now, and one of the things that I stress is to break things down to their simplest individual sections, right? The individual tasks, right?
Sure.
Don't look at this big thing as and like a good example is one of the things that we're doing now is we're taking this big routine that refreshes the lower environments from the prod backups, right? But everything's in an AG, so you've got to take it out of the AG, and you got to download the thing from S3, and you got to restore the database and now back to the AG, right? And then you got to deal with security and all that. And this whole thing, it's this big thing that when you think about it, there's only a small handful of basics there.
Yeah.
So these are techniques, right? You just string basics together, right?
Yeah.
So you've got backup and restore 3 times over. You've got adding an AG. You got adding a database to an AG. You've got the reverse of that. So the command's really the same, right? You've got copying a file from S3. Okay, then you got deleting it afterwards. So you've only got a handful of things, a handful of basics you need to know how to do. And now you're just arguing about how to string those things together and what format are you going to string those things together in, right? So this is the same thing. I'm tying this back, by the way. So this is the same thing. When you consider consolidation, that's completely different from housing. Yeah. So that's my opinion.
I thought that was a very cool perspective. So we've gone through all of these things. We've got the step-by-step. The last couple of things we had, I'm not going to get deeply into planning physical resources, but just note that that's part of the consolidation process is disk layouts, right? Separating out data and logs, separating out your important or high impact databases, separating out TempDB, all of that kind of thing. And I put this in as an and finally, that'll be in the next blog. You said once you get all that done, now you need to determine if anything should be separated into separate servers entirely for resource consideration. So like you do all of this work and it's almost like, it's not academic exactly, but I think the final step is sort of all right, here's what we've planned. Now boots on the ground. It's like that scene in West Wing where they're arranging the seating for everything.
Right.
Like, oh, wait a second. We need to move him closer to the lectern because he's hard of hearing. This is the hard of hearing step. We're not going to call it that. Go, oh crap, that can't be on there for this random reason.
And it seems backwards that would be the final step. But we've tiered everything, we've spec'd everything out, we've decided, politically or socially, security-wise, which ones can live together, socially, which ones can live together. Now we've got all of our resources and we go, okay, these apps can be on the same server from all these other aspects, but for this other reason, a lot of times it's resources, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it goes back to politics again, right? Then This one needs to be separated off on its own, and so does this one. And you know what? Big deal, because you've still consolidated, right? And by separated out on its own, leave them where they are, right? Because they're already on their own.
Yeah.
So sometimes that has to happen. So you're going to have, 17 boxes instead of 13. Big deal.
Sure. Before we had 80. We're doing much better now.
Exactly. Even if you get down to only 50, you're still doing a good job. That's still 30 down.
I think the problem that I tend to have, and again, I am much, much less experienced in consolidation than you are, because I've been in all these little shops that don't have a ton of sprawl. And it's just different when you're dealing with hundreds of databases.
Yeah.
The big thing for me is I think I always by default want a right answer. I want things to be algebra. So, in my head, there's got to be some perfect method that you can go through to get this perfect answer of consolidation. But it feels a lot more like index tuning than it does, or backup tuning than it does, an actual equation where there are absolutely principles and steps, but it's also kind of an art. At the end of the day, it comes down to
I like to think of
business
it as,
considerations.
I like to think of it as chemistry, right? You assign these applications in just sort of a way, and you get Cheerios.
Okay.
You move this one little thing over here to the end, and you get meth.
You heard it here first, kids. You can make Cheerios into meth. No, you can't.
So, and what I'm going to end on, because I know we're out of time, but I'm going to end on this, and I touched on this just a second ago, is there is always this drive to over consolidate, to try to bring, 100 servers down to 2 or down to 5. Dude, if you can get 100 servers down to 75, you've won.
Yeah.
Don't over consolidate. Don't try to over impress somebody or go too far, because you can get too many resources on a box, right? And I mean, you can make the box too big. And like I said, like we said earlier, when something goes wrong, it goes wrong for
everything on there.
For everything on there. And things tend to be more expensive on those big boxes and so on, right? So when you have to replace parts and whatnot, this is on-prem, but so don't try to overdo it, right? You're not gonna, it's like with SIS, right? When I interview people and ask them about packages they've written, they start to explain to me about the complicated wheels that they've been able to put into play in their packages and all that. When I'm more impressed when somebody says, yeah, I took a package that was like 3 pages long and got it down to 4 transforms.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more impressed with that.
Yeah, it's very cool. Right? Simplicity is boss.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes that means more servers.
Yeah.
Don't consolidate and end up with more servers than you started with. But cool. Awesome. This went pretty well exactly. I mean, except for the guinea pig and the light and hitting you with the chair, went exactly how I wanted it to go. So
excellent.
Well done. Awesome. We got that first article out on meaningware.net under articles. And the second half of it will be out this coming Monday. So for those of you watching the recording, it's probably already out. Let's go to meaningware.net. And yeah, in the meantime, we'll send you all a link to sign up for our newsletter, follow us on LinkedIn, all that good jazz. So got any final things?
Use your full zip code.
It's a quote.
Yeah.
So
it totally plays.
Awesome. For those of you in the live session, we're going to hang out for a little bit, but I am going to say that is the end of the recording, even if I don't.